Okay. So this is going to be Walker reacting to our why MQTT is still the best tool for building a UNS post on LinkedIn yesterday. Okay. So Martin Thunman, from CEO at Crosser, says he disagrees. I don't think mixing a concept with technology is helpful for the end customers. Religiously pushing one protocol in a multi-protocol world is not the way to go.
Well, okay, that I respect that opinion, but at the end of the day, to implement an architecture, you have to pick technology. Now, you should not become married to technology. As we move up above technology layers, the UNS can still apply, and it still does. However, in the beginning, there is an origination point. If someone says to me, hey, I want to get started with unified namespace, guess where I start? I start on the edge. I start with one asset. I have to pick technology. One of the very first things I have to do is say, okay, what is our common tech for my minimum technical requirements? What are the rules of engagement? How is it the smart things in my business are going to communicate with one another? Now, in this post, we're not saying MQTT is the only solution. We are saying it is the best.
Why does he
and
say
by the way,
religiously then? Why does he say religiously?
well, because it's not he's misinterpreting it as we are saying we're advocating for MQTT religiously. I have said from day one that the rules for unified namespace are that the tech must be edge-driven, report by exception, lightweight, and open architecture. How do we know that? Because we've reverse engineered when people fail in digital transformation, they fail because of three reasons: wrong strategy, wrong technology, wrong partner. So if we go, if technology is wrong and therefore we fail, what are the antecedents that lead to the failure? One of them is it's not edge-driven, it's pull response. One of the antecedents is it is not report by exception, it's sending me blocks of data where the values didn't change. One of the antecedents is it's not open architecture. That is, it is constrained within a solution or a technology that is not accessible by any other client in the architecture. And one of the antecedents is it's not lightweight. The packets are too large. There's too much information on the wire as we start scaling at number of nodes squared equals the impact on the wire as we start to go up. So we reverse engineered and said, here are the 4 requirements so that technology is not the reason we fail. Okay. But there is no argument that MQTT is the only solution. So what I would argue is that MQTT by far is the best technology for unified namespace. And guess what? That's easily measurable. That's not an opinion. That is an observation based on market-wide adoption.
Yes. So we had another comment here for Saravana Kumar Mani. He said, solid take. MQTT isn't perfect, but its balance of simplicity, flexibility, and low overhead make it ideal for UNS, especially at the edge. The lack of rigid structure is a feature, not a flaw. It lets teams innovate on top without being boxed in. We've seen this at BevUwise too. Our platform uses MQTT as the backbone for UNS implementations, adding modeling, orchestration, and integrations on top without losing MQTT's agility. It may not be the forever protocol, but for now, it's the best fit. Curious how others are layering on top of it.
Well, think about it, right? This is the old adage is that perfection is the enemy of progress, right? We talked about this at Prove It in the fireside chat. Why has adoption of MQTT why is it exploded? Why is it that more people are adopting Sparkplug specification versus OPC way? If you measure the amount of adoption of the OPC spec versus Sparkplug, there is way more adoption of Sparkplug in terms of a rate of increase today than there is OPC. Why? Well, the answer is barrier to entry, number one, and a lack of restrictiveness. Like we talked about, is the Sparkplug spec perfect? No, but it's enough to get you going. and it doesn't paint you into a corner. It doesn't create technical debt. I mean, think about it. That has been a core tenet of my philosophy with unified namespace since 2003, 2004. Lots of people want to change the definition of unified namespace. They want the unified namespace. They want the definition of this architecture to be much more specific than I want it to be, than I say it is. Why? Because I understand that in digital transformation, flexibility and agility are core components to success. Think about it. It took me 20 minutes to write a chatbot that can contextualize and decipher the semantic hierarchy, the current events, and the context and normalization of the data within a UNS simply because I didn't constrain myself by over-defining what unified namespace is. I was literally able to bolt new technology onto the architecture, and voila, I was able to query a unified namespace, which, by the way, is, in many opinions, a limitation of the technology that I primarily use to build the UNSs that I use.
Yeah.
The fact of the matter is that we should only standardize, we should only codify, we should only harden the paths on which all of us walk. It's the Disney model. We only put sidewalks where people have beaten down the path. And there's a huge contingent in the market who wants to put sidewalks in places no one walks.
Because they can monetize.
Correct. It is, and this is the argument on Nats. Everyone asks me about Nats, and now Vaughn was, when we were talking about doing this post yesterday. Do we have a very hard opinion on Nats? Absolutely. Do we have a take that we should give? Absolutely. Are we going to give it? No. Why? Because there's information about where the demand for Nats is coming from that we don't have. And what I am speculating is very much what Microsoft did with AMQP. Think about what Microsoft did. Microsoft wanted everyone to adopt Azure. So they gave AMQP away, not because they believed it was the best, not because they really cared about adoption in the market, because they believed that it would steer people towards Azure, because AMQP played such a huge role in the Azure infrastructure.
Oh, you got to read Rajiv's comment. Go to Rajiv.
Okay, so William Van Burskirk asked, if Kafka deployments become simpler, doesn't require complex Apache Zookeeper and managed solutions like Red Panda grow, do you see Kafka potentially overtaking MQTT in this space or Rising Wave? And Rajiv responded,
Well, first, let me give the answer first. Well, my answer is possibly. However, as you move up the stack, it would become more likely. On the edge, you would still see MQTT. Okay, you would see MQTT the closer you got to the edge, and you would see Kafka the further you got up the stack, assuming that were true. Right now, Kafka is primarily used to turn a unified namespace into a time series master data model for consumption in a data lake. That's where we're interposing, where we're going from MQTT to Kafka, is when we say we have this big block of a UNS, a big namespace that we want to turn into time series. And so we want to take the relationship between these parent-child nodes and their events, and we want to turn those into a time series data model for consumption into a data lake. And the answer to that question is yes, we could see Kafka make a play under those conditions and a couple of more. However, I don't see MQTT going away. I just see it being pushed to the edge. But go ahead, Mom. Go ahead and read his reply.
Yeah, so Rajiv said, Zookeeper is gone in V4. Craft is supposed to simplify deployment management. And then he expands here. He said, Rajiv says he needs to disagree strongly with the post. This is doing a great disservice to the value of UNS. UNS is not about protocols, unless the position is that manufacturing data and applications should not scale or serve the enterprise. You cannot, all caps, build a usable event-driven data ops system with MQTT alone. You will need to combine it with Kafka or something alike. And CDC to serve those applications. Ideally, the same UNS should be able to serve multiple broker type systems simultaneously.
It's like, is he reading the same post? It's like,
Yeah, again, he is misunderstanding the post. So again, that is not what the post is saying. The post isn't saying either or. That isn't what it's saying. What it's saying, a unified, think about, the table analogy I use all the time. What a unified namespace is to you is a function of where you enter the infrastructure.
Right.
Okay. So at the cloud level, we are going to see a unified namespace. We are going to see UNS. There are going to be many protocols at the enterprise layer in UNS. We've never said that that's not the case here. But however, what he's doing right here is he is trying to make an argument that because we haven't explicitly talked about every single place where every single protocol, every single technology that you find within UNS, because we haven't explicitly called them out, we are excluding them. We are not. We are shining a flashlight on where people predominantly start and predominantly spend most of their time in the first 3 to 5 years becoming a smart company. If you were to go, hey, unified namespace, we're going to do HTTP, we're going to do REST API, we're going to do SOAP, we're going to do Kafka, we're going to do MQTT, we're going to mix in a little OPC-UA, a little bit of DMP3, we'll have some AMQP over here. If we were to do that post, then we're not teaching anyone anything. We're not teaching anyone anything. Okay? That's not what we have to do. Is we have to pick a direction and go in that direction in these posts. What is the theme and the thesis of this post? Vaughn, what is the theme and the thesis?
It is, why is MQTT still the best protocol to use for your unified namespace?
Correct. It is the best, not the only. It is the best. There is nothing in that post that says that MQTT and DMP3 and AMQP and REST and HTTP and Kafka are not living together.
or the UNS is about protocols.
Of course, we're not saying UNS. I mean, can you have a UNS without protocols?
You're going to build your UNS on some thoughts and prayers.
Can you have a unified namespace? Can you have a unified namespace without protocols? Yes or not?
Practice. No.
Of course not. Can you have a UNS without technology?
No.
Yes or no? No. Okay. Can you have a protocol without a unified namespace?
Yes.
Yes. Can you have technology without a unified namespace? Okay. Both of those guys who referenced this isn't about protocols and not about a technology, both of them, they had a flaw in their logical thinking when reading the post.
There's a straw man almost. They're making a straw man argument.
Correct. You can't talk about UNS without also acknowledging that the technology you pick to write into your minimum technical requirements is important. You cannot talk about UNS without acknowledging that the protocols you choose so that to confirm that they meet the requirements of an IIoT protocol, edge-driven, report by exception, lightweight, open architecture. Those are requirements for an IIoT protocol. You would be you can't talk about UNS and not acknowledge those things.
Yes. So here's another one, Walker Ellen, and then Rick Bellotta actually responded. So I want to get your thought here. So Tim Van Hood, interesting discussion. Would a possible solution be to use standardized JSON objects in the MQTT payloads? containing not just the value, but also metadata like units, timestamp, descriptions, and even engineering limits. This could be combined with a consistent ISA 95 style topic hierarchy and retain messages to make the structure visible to clients. In that way, we could preserve the lightweight, decoupled nature of MQTT, but still offer rich, self-describing data objects, almost like a simplified OPC UA information model over MQTT. Has anyone explored that approach, or would that still fall short of what's needed? And then I'll read it.
By the way, absolutely yes. It's going to still fall short because those JSON-rich payloads are not going to contain it's not going to solve your microservice or your method and function support. However, what he is describing is how people enrich MQTT. That is literally how it's done. It's one of the primary methods. Also, if you look at a SESME profile, so, we're talking about profiles for objects, SESME profiles, that is literally the description of a profile. Hey, also, if you look at a Sparkplug birth node, if you look at a Sparkplug birth payload, that's exactly how it's structured, except it is encoded with protobuf and it's compressed. So the answer is yes. I mean, in fact, that is the approach, and he is exactly on the right path. Zach, however, it still falls short of of closing the limitations in MQTT, because that's going to do nothing for microservice report. It's going to do nothing for topical methods.
Well, historical data flow, their information platform has a really good solution for historical access within a UNS. But what if you had for microservices? Because I did that microservices lesson the other day. I was thinking about it. What if you just had a simple topic structure where you published text that would be containing your Docker Compose file and text containing a script? So then your Docker Compose file spins up a Docker image with the code that you want to run. So you could publish that information to a namespace to spin up a microservice.
Well, of course, but that requires coding on both ends.
Well, yeah. But the coding on the server side would be very simple. It'd be see a Docker Compose file, build Docker container, right? You see what I'm saying? It's similar to this.
But it still right, but it still requires coding on both ends. So the point is that you still have to do both server and client coding. There's nothing wrong with that. That's the way we do.
Is there a way to do microservices without server and client coding?
Of course. Well, yeah. That is, you would write it into a specification. Therefore, anyone who builds an MQTT broker would, in order for it to be MQTT standard compliant, they would have to have that support. You would have to have the ability to publish the definition of the microservice to the server, or the server would be able to parse it, and it would then build the internal support for deploying that microservice from only the client.
So we could do it
Client side. So that doesn't exist. That doesn't exist in the standard.
If we could do it functionally, we would have to make it part of the standard in order for us to have without server and client side scripting.
Correct. And I believe that is where we are. Here are some things that we must add to the MQTT specification, whether it's a separate specification, whether it's a companion spec, which I don't think it should be. I think it should just be built in, because I think this is stuff that should be supported in the MQTT specification. Okay. So say MQTT 6. All right. Number 1, microservice support. There must be entries in the standard for how to build and deploy microservices from the client to the broker. So if I write an MQTT broker and I'm using the MQTT spec, I have the service consumption support on the broker side. The spec also must include requirements for building the consumption and deployment of microservices, the definition of a microservice from a client to the broker, where all clients can then deploy that microservice off an event. That doesn't exist in the spec. It should be there. If I want to write a method, if I want to write topic.method, whatever methods, aggregate history last 30 days, whatever it is, you have to have entries in the specification for how both the broker and the client will handle it. Those things are missing. They need to be in the specification. We are at a point now where, and the third piece is there has to be a mechanism, entries for both server and client in the spec for how to query a namespace.
Why isn't it there
But
yet? Like, is it because we can't decide how to best do it?
Absolutely not. Everyone's doing it the same fucking way. Everyone's doing it the same way.
So then why don't we do it today?
That is the
Why don't we do it tomorrow?
because we're not on the I'm not on the MQTT working group, and I got more important shit to do. If somebody wants to come to me and they want to say, "Hey Walker, what should we do here?" I am happy to consult on that. But I've got companies to run. I mean, you know, it's also saying,
But I was saying we as a
hold on, Zach, I've solved the problem myself. Like I've solved the problems myself. There's no, let me make something perfectly clear. There is no architect on the planet who can digitally transform an organization faster, shorter time to value, more scalable, and more agile and flexible than me. And I would put $1 million on that against any architect on the fucking planet. There is nobody. There is nobody. And it's because I have built the solutions around the architecture, around the digital strategy, and around the technology that makes up my minimum technical requirements for my architectures. I can deploy faster. I can scale faster. I can iterate faster. I can continue to shorten time to value over and over and over again because of the tools I've built around the technology.
100%.
So I've solved the problem for myself.
Yeah.
But we are at a point where the standards, the MQTT Eclipse needs to add in those three elements. By the way,
Their job.
the working group, the working group at Eclipse who oversees the MQTT specification. By the way, I'm not the only one who said this to them. Hundreds of people have said this shit to them. Rick Bellata has written a comprehensive analysis, a gap analysis on the MQTT fucking spec. They've just ignored him. Okay? So by the way, those of you who are reading the LinkedIn post and going, "Oh, we're fanboys for MQTT," you can fuck off. Because believe me, behind closed doors, I am ripping the working group a new fucking ass for the limitations in the specification. However, that does not mean that MQTT is still not the best protocol for getting started with unified namespace. It is beyond debate. It isn't even an argument. Because our discussion, if we were to, let's say we were to do a podcast, so the guy who said, "Hey, this is irresponsible," right? If we were to do a podcast and you were going to make the argument that this post is somehow wrong, the only question I'm going to ask you is, all right, tell me which protocol is better. And your response is going to be, well, they're all needed. They're all important. Okay, great. Go back to your office and shut up then. Because people have to know where to start. People must know where to start. Okay? You cannot write a fucking post that lists 25 different fucking protocols that you're going to have in your unified namespace 8 years from now and have people know where to start. Guess where everyone starts? Converting OPC UA on the edge to MQTT. Building a unified namespace using the topical hierarchy that is native, that is delimited by forward slashes in an MQTT broker. That's where we are. I mean, I appreciate the comments. I really do. I really do. But at the end of the day, does MQTT have limitations? No question. However, because it's flexible, because it supports agility, those limitations don't limit you. You can build the solution on top of the standard. That is something you cannot do with AMQP. It is something, well, you could with the SDK. I don't have to use an SDK to build the solution. I can do it with Python. I can do it with C. I can do it with Node.js. I could do it with enter in any other simple programming language. Why is it that every programming language has a robust MQTT support? Because it is fucking easy to adopt. Because the specification is not complicated. The barrier to entry is low. Too many architects in our industry, too many thinkers, what they do is they over-engineer everything.
It's a mental masturbation.
And they never ask the question, what is the value of this engineering? One of the greatest lines I've ever heard is when Elon Musk said, the biggest mistake any engineer can make is the biggest mistake that we can make is to
Optimize something that shouldn't exist.
optimize a solution we should have never engineered in the first place.
Yeah, I want to go through one more. We got time for one more, and it's Rick Bellotta's, and I'll read you Rick's statement, and I'll read you what I replied back, and then I just want to get your take on that too, Walter. So Rick says, still going to disagree. If you stop at MQTT, you failed. You've not permitted browsing of your namespace, so that's what's the point if consumers can't discover the data, and then the lack of metadata on MQTT topics. Sorry, but it's not adequate. And here's how I responded. I said, Rick, that's totally fair. You're not wrong. MQTT doesn't support browsing, discovery, or metadata, and those are real limitations. If all you build is a broker with a bunch of retained messages, you haven't built a usable UNS. And then I said, HiveMQ is trying to solve those problems with Pulse. Litmus is also thinking bigger, making UNS queryable, schema aware, and maybe even transport agnostic. Those are good moves. So no disagreement from me that MQT alone isn't enough. We just think it's still the best foundation for now because we can extend it without being boxed in.
Correct. There's nothing in that post that says MQTT is enough.
Do you think people are using in their post to like market their wares and stuff?
No question. No question.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And by the way, by the way, this discussion is valuable. It's really valuable, right? No question. But are people misinterpreting the post on purpose? Yes. These are not stupid people. They're doing it on purpose because there's a specific thing they want to say.
Which is fair enough. We appreciate the engagement, but we kind of see, we can, I'm like, well, are you doing that on purpose?
Right.
Absolutely.
Because we've had this conversation how many times with Rick, and he keeps saying the same thing. Well, and you notice how he didn't respond to that.
Well, he's correct. There are limitations, and we've never said there weren't. But we owe it to the community to give people who's just starting out on their journey the place to start, the foundation.
Yeah.
All right. This is a great conversation.
All right. That's it. I'm done.